Islam. Praise Allah. Hajj Prophet, honors each and every one of you. Welcome if it's your first time here. Welcome back if it's a return visit for you. Praise Allah. I appreciate it. When I thank Allah for being able to do this and being able to speak to y'all about the Holy Quran of the More Science of America. Divinely prepared by no prophet, Drew Ali, by God and his Father, God Allah, great God of the universe, to redeem man from his sinful and fallen state, made back to highest plane life for his Father God, Allah. Praise Allah. It's Monday, April, I think 11th. Don't quote me on that. My bad, y'all. But praise Allah. Nice day out today where I'm at. Just got back in from taking my dog on a walk. Enjoying the sunlight, getting your steps in. That's crucial, to having good health. Every day try to get a good amount of sunlight in. Every day try to get a good amount of steps in, Always be striving. Praise Allah. So today, we're going to be reading the Divine Instruction of the Holy Prophet, chapter 5. After the feast, the homeward journey, the missing Jesus, the search for him. His parents find him in a temple. He goes with them to Nazareth. Symbolic meaning of carpenter's tools. Again, that's chapter 5. All right. The great feast of the Pasch was ended, and the Nazarenes were journeying towards their home. And they were in Samaria, and Mary said, "Where is my son? No one has seen the boy." And Joseph sought among their kindred who were on their way to Galilee, but they had seen him not. Then Joseph, Mary, and the son of Zebedee returned and sought through all Jerusalem, but could find him not. And Mary asked the guards had they seen Jesus, a little boy about 12 years old. The guards replied, "Yes, he is in temple now disputing with the doctors of the law." And they went in and found him as the guard has said. And Mary said, "Why, Jesus, why do you treat your parents thus? Lo, we have sought 2 days for you. We feared that some great harm had overtaken you." And Jesus said, "Do you not know that I must be about my Father's work?" But he went round and pressed the hand of every doctor of the law and said, "I trust that we meet again." And then he went forth with his parents on their way to Nazareth. And when they reached their home, he wrought with Joseph as a carpenter. One day as he was bringing forth the tools for work, he said, "These tools remind me of the ones we handle in the workshop of the mind, where things are made of thought and where we build up character. We use the square to measure all our lines, to straighten out the crooked places of the way, and make the corners of our conduct square. We use the compass to draw the circles around our passions and desires to keep them in bounds of righteousness. We use the axe to cut away the knotty, useless, and ungainly parts and make the character symmetrical. We use the hammer to drive home the truth and pound it in until it is a part of every part. We use the plane to smooth the rough, uneven surface of joint, and block and board that go to build the temple for the truth. The chisel, line, the plummet, and the saw all have their uses in the workshop of the mind. And then this ladder with its trinity of steps, faith, hope, and love. On it, we climb up to the dome of purity and life. On a 12-step ladder, we ascend until we reach the pinnacle of that which life is spent to build the temple of perfected man. Islam. Praise Allah. Praise Allah. Praise Allah. Again, very insightful chapter. As always, it's a powerful chapter. All the chapters in the Holy Quran of More Science of America are powerful. And as you see, all of them got, various lengths. This one was only a page. The one that we read in the previous video was about a page and a 3/4. Then the very first chapter was about, a page and 3/4, so every chapter, has various lengths, Some may only be a page, some may be 2 pages. I'm not sure if there's any that 3 pages, but praise be to Allah, because, the Prophet, he called this a pamphlet anyways, this right here, the whole Holy Crown of Moorish Science to America. All this pages, it's only 64 pages, the whole thing, and that's, some of the pages have images on them and such, apologize, but the Holy Prophet Umar Ali, is on 1 page. And then we got Sultan Abdul Aziz ibn Saud, the Sadat Hagar, now the head of the holy city of Mecca, at the time of this publishing in 1927. So praise be to Allah. Knowing his chapter 5, after the feast, the homeward journey, the missing Jesus, the search for him, his parents find him in the temple. He goes with them to Nazareth, symbolic meaning of carpenter's tools. So Prophet is all letting us know what's going on, in the title. Praise be to Allah. So we'll get started into this. Instruction 1. The great feast of the Pasch was ended and the Nazarenes were journeying towards their homes. Now, I'll admit, again, this is one of them things where y'all can help me, understand, because I'm not too clear on what the great feast of the Pasch is. I could use more clarity on that. So if anybody knows, what the great feast of the Pasch is, please leave a comment, and explain it to me or direct me to a resource that I could look and get some understanding on it. But my understanding, is a great feast, big party, a lot of people eating food, being merry, etc. So they had went together, the Nazarenes. They were journeying towards their homes, and they were in Samaria. So I'm not too sure how far Samaria is from Jerusalem. But then Mary noticed, her son was missing. She asked, where is her son, and she finds out nobody has seen the boy, Imagine the shock that she was in, going to this feast, traveling back home by foot, by camel, by horse, etc. And then you notice, your child isn't with you. And Joseph saw them under kindred who were on their way to Galilee, but they had seen him not. So Joseph went and looked among his family. Nobody seen him, no. So then Joseph, Mary, and the son of Zebedee returned and sought through all Jerusalem. So he went back to Jerusalem. They still could not find him. Then Mary asked the guards, had they seen Jesus, a little boy about 12 years old? So Jesus in this situation was only 12 years old, And you think about the context of this, when he was a babe, he was took in the Zoan, Egypt, he had learned from under Elihu and Salmon. He learned underneath Matheno. And John had went his way. John, had went into the temple of Zechariah in the Valley of Nile. So, John was at the temple of Zechariah in the Valley of Nile. So John was still in Egypt at this point in time getting his lessons, because we're told that John lived and wrought within these temple gates 18 years. So we can assume, when he was 12 years old, this is what he had to go and do. He had to go to the temple of Zechariah and become a student there. So then we're getting an idea of what Jesus is doing when he's 12 years old. So he went to Jerusalem, the great feast. And then, Mary and Joseph, had lost track of him. And then the guards replied, they said, yes, he's in the temple now disputing with the doctors of the law. So at 12 years old, Jesus was disputing with the doctors of the law. Praise be to Allah. That lets you know that, the prophethood of Jesus, that wisdom, up in the Holy Crown of Moorish Science, in the Great Crown of Muhammad. We're told a little bit about Jesus and the great wisdom that he had as a child, even on to the point to where he was able to speak when he was like a toddler type stuff, So we're seeing that again here. And praise be to Allah for sending divine Prophet Umar Ali, because he links it all together, He bring it all together for us. So here, we see that he's 12 years old and he's disputing with the doctors of the law, Become a doctor, you you gotta study like 8 years up in modern, university. I don't know how long it took for them to study, then, but imagine that you a doctor and you over here disputing the law for 12-year-old, and they went in and found him as the guard had said. And again, though, that's a understanding, for parents, for teachers, etc., coaches. When you have a young talent, 12 years old, and they're demonstrating that they got a gift, a talent. Again, take the time to nourish that talent. Don't scold them or say, don't be doing that, like long as they're not being disrespectful, that's a talent that they've been given from the great God, and it's up to you to nourish that. Think about a plant. Imagine somebody give you a seed and say, hey, if you take good care of this seed, it's going to grow and it's going to provide you with all the food that you need. You would take good care of that seed, wouldn't you? And that's what Allah, gives when he gives people their children, and he gives that child a great gift that's seen very early on, in their years, as it was seen here in Jesus, his ability to teach, his ability to have logic, his ability to understand the law. He expressed that when he was 12 years old. So they went in and found him as the guard said, and Mary said, why, Jesus, why do you treat your parents thus? Lo, we have sought 2 days for you. We feared that some great harm had overtaken you. And that's spoken as from a loving parent. She like, questioning Jesus, like, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you give us a heads up? We thought we had lost you. She said, we feared that some great harm had overtaken you, And even then, that was a test from Allah to Mary too, to Mary and Joseph, to have that faith. We got belief, faith, and fruition, and to have that faith in Allah, that Allah is keeping safe, Jesus in this situation. And because, he was gone for 2 days, that's a good amount of time, 2 days, 2 days, you gone for 2 days, that's a good amount of time, So yeah, they had the right, to be fearful, and she was just wondering, Jesus, why didn't you say nothing, why didn't you tell us? Let somebody know, and Jesus said, do you not know that I must be about my Father's work? So Jesus is letting it known early, he got a mission from Allah, and that's his number one responsibility on this earth. He not concerned about, he's not worrying about some great harm overtaking him. What Jesus is worried about here is doing the work of his Father, making sure that the message of Allah, the message of Allah and man, the messages of love and purity are being spread and being taught, because Jesus' soul was set on fire with love and holy zeal. So this is an example of holy zeal. He said, like, you not know that I must be about my Father's work. That's that holy zeal, when you have that strong feeling, that strong belief, that strong knowing that this is your task, is what you must be doing. So, he asked her a rhetorical question, After that, you see that she didn't, she understood. She knew who she had. She didn't keep on going with him like, oh, I'm your mother, I'm this and that. She didn't keep on going with that because she knew. Mary knew. She had been trained for that too, by Elihu and Solomon and Matheno. They taught her too. There's going to be a time when Jesus is going to have to come and be his own and go out into the world and teach the world. And when that moment comes, she can't slow it down. She can't pull it back in. She can't question it, because that's what he was ordained to do. And she was ordained and taught to be ready for that. So that's why she was able to handle this so well. Always show honor and love to your parents. Praise Allah as best as you can. And know that you got to do what you got to do. know you gotta do your mission that you were sent by Allah, by the great God, to do on this earth plane for the uplifting of fallen humanity, the uplifting of yourself. And it said, but he went round and pressed the hand of every doctor law and said, I trust that we meet again. So even though they was disputing, he still showed respect and honor. He still went around, shook everybody's hand, said, I pray that we meet again. You know, he was putting them good seeds of hope out there for it. You know, he didn't want to lead these people, you know, these doctors with no like a sense of him having a higher ego or him thinking that he was a know-it-all, you know, or him presenting himself as an enemy to them. He said, you know, I trust that we meet again. He went and pressed the hands of every doctor, you know, of the law and said, I trust that we meet again. So Jesus is planting seeds of hope and good fortune, goodwill, peace among men at that moment. And then he went forth with his parents on the way to Nazareth, and they reached their home he wrought with Joseph as a carpenter. So we often hear about Jesus being a carpenter up over here in the West. And again, the prophet is letting us know, you know, Jesus, he did work with his father, Joseph, as a carpenter. You know, when they got back home from this, he did work with him. You know, when Jesus first went out talking to the world, you know, like this is our first instance of Jesus teaching in the Holy Crown of More Science of America. And it was when he was 12 years old. You know, that's our first instance of him being a teacher, you know, him disputing, you know, teaching. And as we see, we continue on. One day as he was bringing forth the tools for work, he said, so as he was bringing forth these tools for work, you know, think about the tools that you use every day in your life, you know, your cell phone, your computer, even your body, you know, and then whatever job that you do specifically. Like I work on computers, you know, so that's my tool for work. Other people, you know, they may be construction, you know, they might have, you know, like a similar tool bag that Jesus described here. You know, ladies, you know, hairdresser, nail dresser, you know, have your irons, you know, the curling irons, you know, the tools to do the nails, all these different tools. You know, the prophet is just letting us know that what we see in the physical, we could use that to help us get an understanding of the inner life, of how our brain, how our soul, you know, uses our brain to think, reason, will, understand, comprehend the inner life, you know, our thoughts, our emotions. You know, we could use the tools like this pencil, like this is a tool, you know, like we could see these things in the physical and we could think about them on a higher understanding, you know, through signs and symbols. You know, like we read in chapter 4, when Matheno said, men comprehend the inner life of what they see and do. They come to Allah through ceremonies and forms. And then, you know, we talk about how a right symbolic may be introduced, you know, and Matheno here is talking about, you know, how humanity comprehends things through signs and symbols, you know. So Jesus, like, you know, he's bringing forth the tools for work, that them tools that he knew his father had a good understanding about, you know. So this was his opportunity to teach his father what he understood, you know. And said, he said, these tools remind me ones we handle in the workshop of the mind, where things are made of thought and we build up character. So in the workshop of the mind, so the prophet is taking us beyond the human flesh. You know, he's taking us to where our actions originate, you know. Before you really do something, more often than not, you think about it. Even when something happened in a flash, your brain is even faster. You know, it has a little quick thought. You know, you see a car coming real fast that you got a quick thought, move or not. You know, like you get in an argument, you get into a conversation with someone, you got a little quick moment. Think about what you're going to say. You know, you got opportunities. Think. No, that's the workshop of the mind, where things are made of thought and we build up character. So we first start to craft things in our minds that we want to see into this physical manifestation. You know, you think about how you want to look when you go to the gym. Like me, I'm working on like my shoulders some, right? My shoulders, my traps, my neck, right? So I had to think about what exercises I need to implement in order to work those muscles. That's what it's mean where things are made of thought. I see myself gaining these muscles in this area. That's made of thought at this moment. As I continue to do the work, it's going to become into the physical. And that's anything in life, like any great painter, any great artist, any great anything, they had to think about what they was going to do first. We hear a lot of talk about the secret, manifestation, all these different kind of concepts, and it's all originating with a thought. You got to get that thought of you uplifting for all humanity. Get that thought of you uplifting yourself. Get that thought of you being love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Get that thought of you having economic freedom. Get these positive thoughts within your mind and fashion them in the workshop of the mind. Think of it as a block of wood, your ideal self. Start to think about what your ideal self is, what your life will look like, the things you will have, the relationships you have with people, and craft them according to love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Don't craft them according to hatred, slander, lewdness, murder, theft, and everything that harms. The other part of this is where we build up character. So we'll have thoughts. We'll have thoughts. We'll have these thoughts that challenge our understanding of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Thoughts that invoke hatred, slander, lewdness, murder, theft, and everything that harms. And this is where we build up character. In building a building, say that the builders know this is an area where the winds are especially strong, right? Or maybe the area is prone to earthquakes. They don't just build it and say, I hope this stands up. They build it and then they put extra things in it to make sure that it's standing up to these conditions it's got to face. And that's you. That's us. Building up our character. Take the moment when you're in the workshop of the mind. Okay, I'm at my job. Say this person, say this to me. What I'm going to say back to him. So I'm walking down the street and I see this person. How I'm react to him. Say I know I got to have this difficult conversation with a family member or my significant other. What am I going to say if they say this? What am I going to say if I plan to say this and I say it and then they say this or they say that? This is where you build that up. You rehearse it in your mind before you go out into the world with it. Make sure that you got it right. Build up where things are made of thought, and we build up character. Prophet said, we use the square to measure all the lines, to straighten out the crooked places away, and make the corners of our conduct square. And you think about the square. A lot of us familiar with the Freemasonry sign, right? You see the square, look like that, and then it's the compass, over top of it, more often than not. So that square is it's a 90-degree angle. That's a square. It's a 90-degree angle. So use that square, right, to measure out our lines, making sure this angle is straight. This angle is straight. This angle is straight. This angle is straight. All these different angles in our lives, making sure that they straight. And then even measuring the distance. Maybe I need to distance myself from this person a little bit, right? Maybe I need to bring this person a little bit closer. Measuring out those lines, straighten out the crooked places of the way. You take that principle of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, and you put it up against whatever you're doing. You make that 90-degree angle up against your actions. You take those 5 divine principles, you put it right there up against it, right? And if what you're doing is not straight in line with that, then that's where you straighten out the crooked places of the way and make the corners of our conduct square. You could apply that to anything in your life. And that's the beauty of the prophet's teachings. Because again, he told us this is going to be a conflict that cannot be told in words. But he given us the tools to work out these conflicts in ourselves that cannot be told in words. I don't need to get into more specifics about things that's affecting me or affecting others outside of just with myself. When it comes to these tools are made of thought. Where we work on things made of thought, we build up our character. So when I think about this, a simple one, I work out, right? I work out. So I work out. I like do deadlifts. What I'll record myself doing deadlifts, right? And I know what a good deadlift looks like. I know what a square deadlift looks like to say, I could look at my back, my hips, and see if they in alignment with where they need to be, right? If I see that, I'm a little bit too bent over, or all my hips is a little bit too low, or they're too high, or my back is too bent over or something like that. That's me measuring out all my lines of my body, and then straighten out the crooked places. Okay, I see on that rep, I lost my posture. My back, I bent over a little bit. That's why I didn't move that weight as easy, right? And that's what the prophet is talking about doing here. Using that type of thought, that type of philosophy, and make the corners of your conduct square. So I look and I say, okay, next rep, I'll make sure I don't lose my posture. I'm gonna make sure I got this like this. And that's making my conduct square. And that just is an example for weightlifting. You could use that for anything in life. I'm coding. I know I need to have this like this. I go and look, it's not like that. So then I go and fix it. That's using that square. Then prophet says we use the compass to draw the circles around our passions and desires, keep them in the bounds of righteousness. And the best way to think about this is through, for me, is through economics, having economic freedom, right? But then too, using the compass, my passions and desires, right? I shouldn't let those get over on somebody else. It says keep them in the bounds of righteousness. So the prophet is saying, if you got this, put it in a circle. And when it starts to get outside that circle, you're going too far. Could use that for eating, right? You can use that for eating. I'm counting my calories. That's me putting a circle on how many calories I can have in a day. Either I'm going to be above that calorie count, or I'm going to be below that calorie count, or I'm going to be right on top of that calorie count. If I'm too far below it, that's outside the circle. I'm not going to have enough energy to do what I need to do. If I have it too high, that's outside the circle. I'm going to be gaining weight that I don't want to gain. But when I have it right in that sweet spot, right in the middle of that circle, it's going to be doing what I intend and thought it to do. And that's how life is. Anything, Start earning money. Okay, I know I need to spend this much on this. I know I need to spend this much on that. I know I need to spend this much on that. And as soon as you start spending too much, or you start spending too little, you're not within that circle that you drew. You're not within that bounds of righteousness. Your body. Allah gave us an arm. You could put a circle around your body, right? That's drawing a circle around yourself. Not letting your passions and your desires get from up out yourself. Some people have issues, Ready to go drink. I had this issue, you know. I got drunk, right? I got drunk. I'm sitting in the club. I grabbed this person by their beard. I was in the wrong. You know, I let myself get up outside the bounds of righteousness, outside that circle amongst myself. You know, I was wrong. So that's what we got to be aware of with these different things that we come across in our life. Any type of external substance, you know, it could be anything. It could be alcohol, anything. Anything, if you do too much of it, can get outside the bounds of righteousness. Anything you do too little of it can get outside the bounds of righteousness. It's all about understanding where you at in your life and putting that circle there for yourself. Prophet said, we use the axe to cut away the knotty, useless, ungainly parts and make the character symmetrical. Think about what an axe is. No, my bad. The compass is. We don't all use the compass up in our lives, but a rudimentary compass would be even this. You know, tennis ball. I put this point here at the top of the tennis ball, and now I could work, and I'll have, you know, some type of thing right here, and I could work that in a circle. No, that's a rudimentary compass. You can even do a compass with 2 pencils, you know, right? See, it's a compass. You could use that. So you got that point there. You put them 2 points together. You could draw a circle, you know, and it's going to be a circle. So that's a compass. I don't got an official compass here right now. Not right now within arm's reach, but what I just showed you. So then we going to the axe. Cut away the knotty, useless, ungainly parts and make the character symmetrical. That's our habits, you know. Think about your habits. You know, what am I spending too much time on? Is it useless? Is it ungainly? When the prophet say knotty, Knotty. Y'all have to look up that word. Let me know what it means, but only thing I could think of, you know, if you got a rope and it got a knot in it, you know, you use an axe to cut that knot, you know, you cut that. But that might not be the right context. Like I said, if y'all could leave a comment on what knotty means, Knotty, I'll greatly appreciate that. Again, we use the axe to cut away the knotty, useless, ungainly parts and make the character symmetrical. So in our habits, our everyday habits, our eating habits, our viewing habits, our doing habits, anything that we do, any habits that we got, we could look at them and see if they're useless, ungainly. And if they are, then we use that axe in our mind. We cut our association with that habit and we make our character symmetrical. You think about symmetrical. This is symmetrical. These are symmetrical to each other, right? It starts to get unsymmetrical. You know, say you're doing too much of that. That's now unsymmetrical, right? This is unsymmetrical. So you would cut that. And then as you cut it, it balances itself back out. So that's what the prophet is saying with the axe. Cut away the knotty, useless, ungainly parts and make the character symmetrical. So them things in your life that you're doing that aren't bringing you anything, but they're taking up a lot of your time. They're taking up a lot of your energy. They're taking up a lot of your money. Now, one thing for me was video games. I spent a lot of time playing video games, right? And it's how I was doing it was useless and ungainly in terms of economics. You know, I have fun, stress relief, got to be competitive and things like that. But now in this day and age, if you're playing video games, you need to be streaming. You need to be making content. You need to be making clips. You need to be making guides. You need to sell that. Because video games now, none against video games, this is just the truth. They require you to put in a lot of time, right? You got to put in a lot of time. If you're not participating in tournaments, you're not getting no money back from that. If you're not streaming, you're not getting no money back from that. So you're spending hours. You get in-game items, right? Them are dope. You know, you get cosmetics. You might get a special gun. You might get a special card if you're playing a video, like, you know, card collecting game. But guess what? When next year game come out, or that season end even, boom, all that's gone. You ain't get nothing back from it. Unless you were streaming, unless you was making content, unless you was competing in tournaments. If you're not doing none of them things, I ain't gonna say you wasting your time, but for me, I was wasting my time. So that's what prophets say about that ungainly and useless parts. You know, all that time I was spending playing video games, I could have been working on my code. I could have been working on my body. I could have been working on, you know, my mind. A lot of things I could have been working on, but I was working on video games. You know, and I didn't stream. No, I didn't make content like that. Now, when I do play video games, I stream on Twitch and stuff like that. So I feel a little bit better about it, but I'm not doing it, you know, as high as I can. So I limit that, you know. I limit that as best as I can. So then we go on and say, we use the hammer to drive home the truth and pound it in until it's a part of every part. And that's the truth, the hammer. Use the hammer to drive home the truth. You know, and that's repetition. That's when you understand something as being the right way to do it. You keep on doing it. You think about if you ever go and watch Mike Tyson when he was a young boy, you know, when he was 15, 16, 17 years old, and he became the youngest heavyweight champion in the world in history. When he was working with Cus D'Amato taught him a move, a fishing move. Mike Tyson practiced that, did the action, and Cus made sure that he did that action the right way. That was the hammer. Constant reps. That was the movement that Mike needed to master in order to become the champion. And they both realized that. So they used the hammer. They did that until it was a part of every part. Did it so much Mike could do it with his eyes closed. You know, you think of Michael Jordan too. You see him shooting his free throws. There's one that you could go find where he closed his eyes and he shoot his free throws. You know, he learned that form that he needed to have to shoot the free throw. He drove home that truth of what he knew, how to make a free throw. And that's what we use in all our parts of life. Once you learn the truth, you know, once you see that something works, keep doing it. Drive home that truth that it works. You don't need to be worried about changing it up. You know, if it's working, if it's what's the saying? If it's not broke, don't fix it type stuff. Now, we use the hammer to drive home the truth. And that's studying. You know, when we think about in the workshop of the mind, and we think about our ideal self, we constantly use that. Think of a hammer. Hey, these are the habits I need to have every day. This is where I need to think about myself every day. Drive home that truth in your mind. Drive it home. Think of a hammer pounding in the nail. It's that simple. You know, you use a hammer and you pound in the nail. You posting up, you making a shelf. You use that hammer. You pound that nail in that part of the shelf until it stands up. You know, until it holds its place. And that's what it's about in our lives with the practice of repetition on things that we know are the truth. The repetition is the hammer. Thinking about it constantly. Prophet goes on to say, we use the plane to smooth the rough, uneven surface of joint. So the plane, think about the plane, you think about sandpaper, cause that's on the plane, the other side, most of the time you have a flat board, something you can fit in your hand, and then some sandpaper, right? Use that. You smooth out the rough, uneven surface of joint. The plane is flat, it's level. Think about, even washing dishes, the sponge be flat, it's level. So when you use that, that's on our minds, on our character. When we do something, like, we know it's right to say, I appreciate it. And when somebody does something, I give thanks to Allah. So when somebody does a favor to me, I say I appreciate it. And that's, if you need to work on that, that's that uneven surface of joint, that interaction with somebody, working on them things, using the plane, using what you know is level, using what you know is a level, because it's that plane, it's level, using what you know is level. And what's always level is love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. So everything that we go through in our lives, we could smooth it out. We can smooth that roughness. I have a certain type of speaking sometimes. I can use love to smooth out that roughness in my voice. I could use, the different principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice to smooth out them rough parts of my life. Every aspect, love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. You use that. You use that. Use that to smooth out all them rough, uneven surfaces of your life. Use the love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice as your level with everything. Prophet goes on to say, and block and board that go to build the temple for the truth. Block and board. You're building something. You post you use a block to post, and you use the board. I'm not, I'm not a carpenter, so if y'all can, help me on that, using block and board that go to build the temple of the truth. But I'll give you one right here. So I got the Holy Quran. I got the questionnaire, and I got the Holy Quran of the More Science of America. Now, if I'm building a house for my soul, for my salvation, this could be the block, and that's the board. You see that? Just like that. You can't see that, but just like that. Block, board. I threw discus, right? And one of the key aspects of discus is that when you get to the finishing throw, you block. So I threw right-handed, so my block was my left foot. The board coming through. You use that bow. You use that block, stop and hold it. You use the board to push up. Whatever it is that you need pushed up against that board. Up against that block. That block is not moving. That board is up there. It's holding. Because that block is holding. So you got the block there. You got the board. And then you build on top of that board. Whatever you need to build. Talk about the build the temple for the truth. So you work on that. Use the block and the board. Use both of them to build the temple for the truth. To understand what's going on. To learn the truth about yourself. And the truth, what's the truth? The truth is God. So when using that block and board in your life, you got to figure out what it is that you can be sure about. What you got right now that you can be sure about, right? And that's the Holy Crown of More Science to America. For me, I could be sure about this. So that's that block. Everything else that you need, I could push that up against it. And that's going to be that. Praise be to Allah for that, because, like I said, block and bore, I'm not a carpenter, so I'm using, logic. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And like I said, I hope that y'all leave a comment, let me know, so I don't continue on in my ignorance. And the Prophet says, the chisel, the line, the plummet, and the saw all have the uses in the workshop of the mind. So you think about the chisel. What's the chisel? The chisel is like, you think of a block of stone or something, right? And got that chisel, the small little hammer thing, and chisel out the pieces, the features, like, see those marble statues that the Greeks and the Romans and that made? They use a small chisel to make them small details, You think about my forefathers in North Africa, Spain, Mali. We was real intricate with the typography, I think it's called, that we used in our buildings. So like this wall behind me, my forefather, they took a little small chisel, wrote out like some Arabic type stuff and raised it up and engraved it. Would have put like an engraved level, would have put some stucco or something on there, then like use a little small chisel, like write calligraphy, different Arabic words, calligraphy, put little signs and symbols, put the stars up in there, all these different things. That's the use of a chisel. It's like the hammer, but it's so small and intricate and delicate. Use the hammer, you got big surface, bow, you just hit that. But the chisel small, small, and you gotta use a hammer you gotta use a smaller hammer to use that chisel. That chisel, like the little thing, just has to be super detailed. So that's when you working on your grand master plan. Use that chisel there up in your mind. The line, the plummet, I need some help with them. But I think the plummet it's like a thing that you hold and you drop it. And if it swings a certain way, you could tell if something is level. The line, I'm not too sure about that, so I'll have to do some research. We'll be back on this chapter, again in the future. So by then, I need to make sure I know a little bit more about what the line is in this instance. And then the saw, I imagine the saw, hand saw, again, that's not quite, the same as the axe. Like, think about the axe. My forefathers, we was on the sea, oh, we need to hurry up. We need to ditch this anchor, or we need to hurry up and get our sail open, grab that, cut it. The handsaw, you gotta, might take a little bit longer, in emergency, you're gonna grab the axe, you're gonna cut whatever was binding. The handsaw, you could be a little bit more intricate, or you might not even need to cut the whole thing. You using a block of wood, a board of wood, you might only need to cut half into it. You might only need to cut half into it, and then you put another, block of wood inside that. So that's, again, another intricate tool. That's a more delicate tool, the saw, to use it up in the workshop of the mind. You might have a habit. You might not need, you can use that saw to cut part of that habit out. You might have it might be a good habit all around, but you might have something bad up in there. You use that saw to cut out that bad piece and still keep the whole rest. And then the prophet talked about then this ladder with its trinity of steps. So 3 steps: faith, hope, and love. On them we climb up to the dome of purity and life. And this one right here, faith, hope, and love, belief, faith, and fruition. Faith, according to my understanding, is what man knows is truth. Then hope. That's hope. All we could do is hope. And love, So how I use this in dome of purity in life, when I see another person, right? Faith, I know that other person has Allah within them, right? And all I could do is hope that they know that they got Allah within them too, and that they see that same thing in I. And then the love, the love and respect between the 2 individuals, love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice, not causing harm to each other, working with each other to uplift fallen humanity, uplift ourselves, that dome of purity in life, using that to keep a pure thought for when I see myself and others, not having a stereotype thought, knowing that whoever that person is, I know that they got Allah within them, and I hope that they know that they got Allah within them, and I hope that they know that I got Allah within me. And then that love that exists between, praise be to Allah, because we all one. We all one. Just like the love that you got for your family, all one. Then the prophet continues on and he says, 12-step ladder, we ascend until we reach the pinnacle, that which life is spent to build the temple, perfect the man. So on the 12-step ladder, you got the 3-step ladder, for getting up there, that purity, then you got the 12-step ladder. And that's taller, you need that to reach more higher things. And that's that love, and we use all that together to reach the pinnacle of that which life is spent to build the temple, perfect the man. Perfect the man, the keystone of perfect the man at the top is going to be love. It's going to be God. That love that God got for all people, for everybody, for everything. That's the keystone. That's the capstone. Think about the pyramids. At the top of the capstone, at the top of the pyramid is, on the dollar, it's an all-seeing eye that represents Allah, that represents God. For us, the temple perfected man, the ideal to put there is love, in God. Because Allah is love. Allah is the eternal love, that within ourselves, where's nearest place to meet Allah? It's within the heart. And what's one thing that we think of when we think of the heart? You automatically think of love more often than not. Because it's been embedded into us, through ages. The heart has always been equated with love. So in love is the nearest place to meet Allah, with love. So that, use that 12-step ladder. First, we got to have that dome of purity. We got to have a pure mind. And then once we have that pure mind, we could put, love on top of it. Praise be to Allah. Because you can't have love without having purity first. You got to have that purity, to make sure that you right, because people love the wrong things all the time, and that purity will keep you from loving the wrong thing, So praise be to Allah, and honors to each and every one of you, honors to helping I grow, putting me in situations where I had to challenge myself. I can't be slow, I can't have a lower thought, can't have none of that, and I thank Allah for putting me in a situation where I could continue to grow, and being able to share this message with y'all, the understanding that I've been able to acquire throughout my years on this earth, and throughout, past lives, whatever. Praise be to Allah. And again, that was chapter 5, after the feast, the homeward journey, the missing Jesus, the search for him. His parents find him in the temple. He go with them to Nazareth, Symbolic meaning carpenter's tools. From the Holy Crown of More Science of America, divinely prepared by no prophet Drew Ali, by God and his Father, God Allah, great God of the universe. Redeemed man from a sinful and fallen stage of man back to highest plane of life with his Father God, Allah. Again, praise be to Allah. Honors to each and every one of you. Honors to the Prophet. Love to you all. Peace on earth. Goodwill to men. Peace.